Good morning, everyone. So if the recent pandemic has taught us anything, I think it is that 3D printing as a revolutionary technology and the medical industry can certainly up its game in adopting it. I think what we're doing here with this series of webinars, where obviously there is the prevalent situation doesn't allow us to do physical events, where our forte is to really organize knowledge sharing and business networking events. Our aim is to basically spread awareness about 3D printing across India, various applications. So, we started on Saturday with our first series of 3D printing webinars on the legal aspects of 3D printing, and today we start a series on various medical. Today we start a series of sessions on the medical aspect of 3D printing. So the idea is to have a series of engagement with the end use industry. So today we have a session where we have three experts in this field: Ayushi Bhan from Materialize, Firoza Kotari from Anatomize 3D, and Ketan Jajal from Jajal Medical Services. Ayushi will be speaking about enabling 3D printing in healthcare. Ketan is going to throw a bit of light on orthopedic applications of 3D printing, and Firoza is going to talk about point of care labs. And I think I will let her share more about it when she speaks. And the order of the day will be basically there will be three presentations in the order I just mentioned, and which will be followed by a panel of panel discussion with the experts. So I would like to start this session. Just before that, I'd like to have a few ground rules for the session today. So if you, in the middle of the session, if you have any questions, please post them through the question and answer segment on your control panel. We will be taking all questions at the end after all the presentations in the part of the panel. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ayushi Bhan from Materialize for her presentation to start off today's session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aditya, for this opportunity that you have given us, to share our thoughts and our notions regarding this whole concept of enabling 3D printing in healthcare. I would just start my presentation by giving a brief overview. It will be a brief overview how 3D printing is affecting healthcare in daily basis, be it universities, be it hospitals, or be it medical device companies. Now, let's begin to where it all started. So on what knowledge is surgery based? It all started with understanding anatomy from animal dissections and human dissections. And with the advent of X-ray and CT and MRI, the imaging shifted from understanding of just the generic anatomy to the understanding of patient's anatomy. Now, what is our goal right now? Our goal is not just diagnose the images and bring the conclusion in head of the surgeon, but actually do this engineering on the images and bring a patient specific, more patient specific solutions at the table. Now, as I mentioned before, the healthcare ecosystem is divided into these three interest groups. We have universities and research centers, which are working day in and day out on a lot of theses, be it biomechanics and incubation centers coming up, with the research center coming up and all the NITs and IITs. We have medical device companies where exactly the idea comes up, right? You are going more into patient-specific solutions. We see a trend, happening in all the big MNCs, and they are moving towards patient-specific solutions. And when it comes to patient-specific solution, they think 3D. And we also have hospitals who are not only executing these patient-specific solutions, but also creating anatomical models, either as a service offering, or they are opening up a lot of 3D point-of-care labs. We would be talking about hospitals first. Now, the first question typically when we approach a surgeon or a hospital, they ask is that why do we actually need a 3D printed anatomical model in our hospital? We have been doing the surgeries since donkey years and we don't see that we need it. But in reality, there are a lot of benefits of using 3D printed anatomical models in the hospital. Be it pre-operative planning, you can talk about, if you have a plan already in your head, you have lesser stress and more confidence. And we have seen this specifically in a lot of complicated anatomies or a lot of diseased patients wherein there are a lot of tumors and the anatomy is very, very tricky. Pre-operative planning does, play a very important role. This definitely leads to better outcome of patients because the surgeon has a surgical plan. There are no outlier issues when he's in the intra-op, and it gives an overall better outcome to the patients. Not just the patients, but it's also a great educating tool for the next generation of surgeons. We see in India, we have a lot of medical colleges, we have DNB students, we have JRs, SRs who are always on the learning mode, and they always operate as well. So anatomical models can also be a very good educating tool for them. Last but not the least is achieve true informed consent from patients. So many times it has happened that, we explain the surgery, the doctors explain the surgery to the patient and they just sign the form. They exactly do not know what's happening, right? Because even if you show them a scan, you show them a MRI or a CT scan, they still would not understand what exactly the problem is. But if you give them a printed model, they can actually feel it and understand where exactly the issue lies. And this achieves a true informed consent from the patient. Just to give one of the example of a pre-operative planning. Now, this is a case study wherein Dr. Shibano, he tried to put a lot of value addition in 3D printed models. What he did was he was doing a very new technology called as percutaneous pulmonary valve implantation, opposed to standard open heart surgery. Now, where 3D printed models helped him was he did a retrospective study which led to more accurate selection of patients who could undergo this new approach, because there is only specific anatomy wherein you can do this PPVI surgery. Coming on to our next interesting case of a preoperative planning. Now, the residents were divided into two groups. Now, the group A was actually viewing a 3D rendered model on the computer of a pancreatic cancer, and a group B actually had a 3D printed model in the hand. So it's quite interesting because both of them use 3D printing technology, but one actually had a model and one was just viewing it virtually. Group B showed a significantly higher quality of surgical plan scores in diagnosing where the pancreatic cancer was and what was the surgical approach which the surgeon should take. This is one more interesting case study of a newborn, which was helped with the support of 3D printing. Now, this is a baby boy who was diagnosed prenatally with a DORV, which is double outlet right ventricle. From the ultrasound images, it was very challenging because it was very difficult to determine the exact 3D relationship of the different anatomical structures, and surgical plan was getting extremely difficult to be executed. What the surgeon's team did in the Presbyterian Hospital was they performed a low-dose CT and they transferred the images into the 3D software, and they obtained an optimal 3D reconstruction. And this was the 3D model which they happened to print. What happened was that with the 3D printed model in hand, they found an ideal solution for repairing all of the defects just during one surgery. Otherwise, the baby had to, undergo a typical series of a lot of palliative operations throughout his entire life for up to 10 years. This is another case of a 17-year-old girl who had an ECG because one of her brothers had a heart murmur. And this indicated an abnormality in the aorta, and she was referred to this Children's Hospital of Michigan. The investigation actually revealed an aortic aneurysm with a very distorted shape. So how 3D printing helped here was that they actually performed a practice run or the simulation in the cath lab where they placed the actual stent into the model, and they did it at least 3 to 4 times so that they know where exactly the stent has to be placed. The advantage of this simulation was that instead of doing it in a proper OR, they just put this stent in a cath lab. And with the treatment in the catheterization lab, Ariana actually spent just one night in the hospital and was home the next day. One more interesting case study of a 3D printed splint. This is a story of baby Kaiba, and he was suffering from a severe tracheobronchomalacia, which actually causes his windpipe to collapse and blocking the crucial flow to the lungs. So he was actually put on ventilators, and currently there was no treatment which could actually help the patient. Now, Dr. Green from Mott Children's Hospital, where the baby was operated, he approached Dr. Hollister from one of the University of Michigan, who was actually working on a bioresorbable splint. What they did was they obtained an emergency FDA approval for this, and they created a 3D absorbable splint wherein the splint was actually sewn on the bronchus, and the patient was discharged after 21 days because he was off ventilators. And within 3 years, the splint was reabsorbed. Coming on to the next bit of the healthcare ecosystem, which is quite interesting, is the medical device companies. Now, traditionally, there are a lot of methods for anatomy characterization. When we talk about anatomical design inputs, it is one of the very important factor in the success of an implant. Several sources can traditionally be consulted to characterize a certain anatomy. Like, for example, physicians can give qualitative input based on the experience. We have, literature study that can provide more quantitative input as well. Cadaver and animal studies can also provide a more hands-on approach. And the input of all these things can be, combined with the analysis of the shape and performance of the existing devices. Now, these approaches have their certain limitation. For example, input from physicians can be anecdotal and difficult to quantify. We have studies in literature which are always not clear in describing what exactly methodology was used in the manufacturing of the implant. Cadavers are typically used in small numbers and basically are not large enough to achieve statistical significance. And animal samples are any which ways limited, in their resemblance to the human anatomy. So what happens is that these limitations of traditional methods, leads to significant risk for a success of a device, and following other risks. So where the device does not necessarily reflect the diversity in the population, leading to smaller target market. It can also have a poor device performance or failure, and can also result into inefficient, evidence. And last but not the least, it has got a longer time to market. So this is where the typical medical device companies would really want to focus. They want to decrease their lead time in the market. And here comes the power of computational modeling. Because of all these traditional methods, that is what they started to focus more on, the computational modeling. It has enabled medical device developers to refine implant designs before testing them during clinical trials. And as the computational modeling is picking up, we have seen that now the regulatory bodies as well as the medtech companies, they are relying more on simulations on virtual patients, and reduce their dependency on animal and human testing. And the virtual patient idea offers medical device company a very cost-efficient methodology to innovate patient care and more easily achieve added value over existing products. Now we have a pie chart on the right-hand side. I picked it up from one of the medical device innovation consortium in US, where they say that now the sources of evidence are just the computer benchtop modeling, animal testing, as well as human trials. But the future is interestingly having a very big pie of virtual patients. And that's where the regulatory bodies and the medtech companies are going towards that. So what's the role of virtual patient in R&D? Virtual patients are used in various ways in the design input, verification, as well as the validation stage of a device design. Now, they enable the advanced 3D morphometric analysis, which is the number 1, and number 2, which is the statistical shape modeling, and give you a nominal or a worst case anatomy as well. The resulting shapes are also used along with initial virtual patients and are a very great input for virtual and physical testing. Once you create this implant, they can be virtually implanted into those anatomy, and you can even go ahead and create a physical model creation. So your validation and your post-market phase reduces a lot once you use a virtual patient. A classic case study to give you a very good significance of a virtual patient. Now this is one of our customers, DJO Surgical, and they wanted to launch a very novel implant, a hip stem, and it was a less invasive implant which closely matches the anatomy of the patient. Now, once they did their pre-market evaluation, out of the 30 cases, they actually had 8 femur fractures. And 2 out of the 6 of their design surgeons actually stopped using the implants. Now they realized the importance of the virtual population. What they did, they went back and they did a lot of changes in the design, and they came to know that at some locations, the hip stem was too wide, leading to local stress concentration, which helped explain why the certain patients were having fractures. Now they made their changes according to the virtual population statistical simulation analysis, and the new design, when they went into the market again for a preclinical trial, they found 0 fractures in 60 cases. The stem has been launched successfully in the market, and there has been no misfires as of now. A second case of aortic aneurysm device testing by Medtronic. Now, Medtronic wanted to treat thoracic aortic aneurysm, and they were working on the R&D since past 7 years. And they used to create benchtop testing models using glass blowing technique. So it used to take for an engineer at least 3 weeks with CAD designing to design the benchtop model, and 4 weeks for an artist to glass blow the model. Now, glass blowing is actually an art and not an exact science. So where does 3D software or virtual population help them? Now, what they did was they were not able to create only the patient-specific model, but also population-specific and worst-case benchtop models. The new workflow allowed them to create a design in 1 to 2 days, and they also allowed them to downsize the production time just to 1 to 2 weeks instead of glass blowing technique. Now let's come to the last part of the healthcare ecosystem, the universities and research centers. Now there are various applications in academia institutes. We have biomedical engineering, we have natural sciences, as well as medical schools. Now, why do they want to involve 3D printing? Definitely technology innovation is one of the most important criteria, but ranking position is also the target of academic institutes. Now, National Institute of Ranking Framework, which is NIRF, in their ranking document gives a lot of weightage to the upcoming innovations, the patents which has been filed by the institutes. And there, it's actually where the 3D printing role comes in. Now, one of the main application of our software is in computational biomechanics field. Computational biomechanics can be further subordinated to mechanics of heart tissue, orthopedics, cardiovascular, and craniomaxillofacial. The second main application of the software, 3D software, can be in medical field, and which can be classified further into orthopedic, cardiovascular, and craniomaxillofacial. So overall, for academic institutes, who strategically incorporate anatomy engineering to support their long-term vision research, and who also educate students with industry and hospital standards, 3D printing has been seen to be adopted at a very high scale. Lot of manufacturers, a lot of 3D software companies have got a lot of plans, have got student licenses, have got university site licenses, just to aid the adoption of universities at a higher level. So I would just like to conclude my presentation by this statement that 3D printing is not just the future anymore. It's definitely our present, and it's impacting lives on a daily basis. We see a lot of 3D printing happening. Even layman right now can see a lot of ventilators, COVID masks coming in India as well, who are adopting a lot of 3D printing. So interestingly, a lot of people around me also are coming up with this thing, oh, that you are working in 3D printing technology. So now we know what exactly it is. So it's not the future anymore, guys. It's actually the present, and it's good enough that we have to implement it at every level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayushi, for summarizing how what are the various areas of adoption for 3D printing. So on this note, I just like to share a poll with our audience. I think I see that it's a wide cross section here today. We have clinicians, we have people from service bureaus, we have some machine manufacturers. So it's interesting. We just want to see what the audience feels. So I'm just launching a poll for all the audience. So the question is, what have you already adopted or are planning to adopt in 3D? So we'll leave this on for say 5 to 10 seconds for everyone to select their answers and put it in. So I see responses already coming in. So it's quite interesting. Ayushi, for you, what in India, what do you feel is which of these areas do you feel are ahead in adoption? The 4 options which we have for our audience. Okay, Ayushi, can you hear me? Okay, so we have our results in for the poll.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted by some reason. Yeah, so
No problem. So if you
yeah.
see on the screen, we have, say, the leading is patient-specific surgical guides and implants. No surprises there. But what, does this kind of what results we've received, does it kind of corroborate with what you have seen in the industry?
Absolutely. So globally, if you talk about it, I think virtual patients and 3D surgical planning would be also a little bit higher. But in India, it's a good trend that we are seeing patient-specific surgical, guides coming in. Personally, I
Yes.
would to see, number 1 and number 3 coming in, because we have a lot of Indian manufacturer companies, and I would want them to adopt this concept of virtual population. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. So for us, thanks again, Ayushi, for sharing your time today and being part of this session and sharing insights on various aspects of healthcare. So for the next presentation, I'd like to move uh, to a specific subject of medical, which is orthopedic, uh, the orthopedic field basically. So we have Ketan Jajal here from Jajal Medical Services, who's going to talk about the de facto standard in orthopedics. So just before I, invite Ketan to start speaking, we just want to share that after we announced this session, we've received a lot of feedback, and based on that, I think yes, today we would like to introduce the subject of 3D printing and orthopedics, but I think there's a good scope for us to do a dedicated session for all the orthopedic specialities there. So just on that note, I'd just like to invite Ketan to share his insights with us.
Thank you, Aditya. Before I share my screen, I just want to thank Aditya and the entire team for giving this opportunity, and it's really an honor to have had a opportunity to present with Materialize, Ayushi and Firoza and everyone. Really proud to be part of this. So let me. It is also great to see that there's a lot of interest in surgical guides and implants. My talk is going to be around this, so hopefully you find it interesting. I'm going to turn off my video just so that the audio doesn't get any choppier. And there you go. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so a disclaimer before we go forward. I am not a surgeon nor a doctor, okay? All of my talks are going to be very biased. They are all, of course, there are some facts. They're also my opinion from my experience over last almost 10 years, 20 years. And they're also very subjective. The things I'm going to show is most of them is public data. And my talk is also in line with Jajal Medical's core value, which is honesty and transparency, people as assets, and deep technical insights. Okay, just a short background of myself. I have had an opportunity to kind of circle around the world and come back from Gujarat, now back to Gujarat. Had a chance to, almost 20 years ago, my thesis was on patient-specific knee implant design with my professor, Dr. Ola Harrison. Then I've had an opportunity to work with 2 amazing companies, Materialize and Stryker, and globally worked with different medical device field and had an opportunity to have some impact there before just last year when I started our own venture called Jajal Medical in Vadodara, Gujarat. Okay, so customization, every patient's bone is different, okay? And from head to toe, whether you take a skull, whether you take a toe, all anatomy is different. Just like our face, just like our fingerprints, everything is different. But I have a bad news actually, okay? And that is that it doesn't mean that we are going to create custom implants for every patient, and that is unique for that patient, okay? It's just not happening. And I think Ayushi really gave that oversight on how, virtual patients are coming in. So, that's where, if you look at other industry, right? How many times have you made your own custom shoes, right? You generally go buy, your size, you go and buy it. In the same way, it's the clothing. And medical device industry and orthopedics is no different, okay? It's no different. It's only getting better with more information as we get the anatomy of different patients and around it. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but like what Ayushi mentioned, virtual patient computational modeling is what the world is moving towards, okay? So custom implants, it's only for specifics where few complex cases where the anatomy doesn't fit. But in general, if you look at it, it's mostly they do a proper statistical shape modeling. They create a computational model over multiple different anatomies across the world, and then create this database from which they design an implant, and it fits really, really well. There's Materialize has it, Stryker has their own thing, they call it Soma. So globally most medical device companies have this and are going towards it. The thing is, these kind of infrastructure within a medical device company is very expensive, right? Just think about it, getting thousands and thousands of scans from across the globe, right? It's not going to be free, right? So these kind of infrastructures are expensive, but in the long run it pays off, because the example that Ayushi gave on the DJO, right? How better understanding of an anatomy can give you great outcome in terms of final implant design, which is what you're looking for. And a happier patient in the end means a happier surgeon, and a happier surgeon in the end also means a happier medical device company. But okay, however, what is important is the customization in the surgery is definitely happening more often than we think. What that means is, use of surgical guides, use of preoperative 3D planning. These are very important, because once the surgeon understands what exactly is happening to that patient, that helps them better plan the surgery. But before we go into that, I actually want to take a break and talk a little bit about, understanding this orthopedic surgeons. I know there are surgeons in this group as well, so pardon me. But then hopefully it gives the industry an example of how they should be working with a surgeon. So if you look at orthopedic surgeons, there are really two types, okay? One is a trauma surgeon, and the other one is a joint replacement surgeon. The trauma surgeons typically they work on accident cases regularly. They also work on malunions. What malunions means is that an accident happened, the fixing was not done properly, and now the patient has a defect that he or she is living for life, okay? So they are actually fixing somebody else's mistake. But it's more complex than even an accident. Extraarticular deformities, congenital deformities. There are also severe fractures in, say, pelvis region or hand region. So those are all kind of come under the bucket of this trauma surgeon in orthopedics. And then you have these joint replacement surgeon who focuses on different types of arthroplasties, right? So knee total knee replacement, hip replacement, or shoulder replacement, ankle replacement. Those are the areas they focus on. However, when you talk to a surgeon, it's important that they also have their own opinions. These are two different types of surgeons, so don't mix it. And if you want to have a chat, this is a good discussion you can have, and you can talk about the other guy, and you'll see an interesting insight from it. But in general, experience has been that they both are amazing surgeons. The trauma surgeons are a lot more innovative in a way, because they have to innovate inside the surgery with what they have. So you'll see that their innovation quotient is a lot higher, while a joint replacement surgeons have to really fine tune quite a bit. 1 degree here and there, 2 degree here and there can make or break their final outcomes of the patient. So they are also always generally focused on precision and accuracy, which is very important for them. So this kind of gives an overview of the orthopedics and how these surgeons are and what it does. Okay, so now I'm gonna just chat a little bit about surgeon interaction, right? And so I put a small picture here. What you see on the left hand side is the surgeon, and what you see on the right hand side is an engineer like me, and this is over my 10-15 years of experience. This is what we have learned, right? So these are the type of languages that an orthopedic surgeon would speak, right? That okay, we will do a lateral decubitus approach. We'll put a magic screw and a 13-hole plate on an anterior brim, and then I'm going to put it a little bit superior from the PBC. These are the kind of statements. And then an engineer would say, yes sir, give me an STL file so I can print it and give it to you, right? So they don't really match. And that's where also you will find that these surgeons are very perfectionist. They don't like mistakes, and if you make one mistake and you're out forever, actually, right? And as an engineers, we have always learned to modify, improve from our mistakes, right? And it's a little bit of a awkward situation that why it's so much focus on being perfect. And I think this is important fact that we as a patient, right? If you look from the patient's perspective, we as patients never expect any mistake from our surgeons, right? Because once we then go inside the OT, we expect the best, right? In the same way, because of that, the surgeons also expect that my team or somebody who's working with me also needs to be perfect, right? And that's where the perfection and the approach comes in, which is I think very important. Unlike other industry, right? This is serious stuff, guys. You can't make mistakes, because it's going to you can actually impact some patient's life forever. So you have to be careful, right? And however, we engineers always are like, okay, I learn from my mistakes. So anyway, so that's where the platforms like MySegmenter or Materialize also has a Heartprint, or there's a 3D system has a virtual VSP technology or the virtual surgical planning. Those platforms allow to kind of bridge this gap between a surgeon and a 3D printing community. What it does is it brings the clinical expertise that allows the surgeons to talk to a biomedical engineer who can figure out and generate an STL file, and then STL file gets can get printed at the 3D printing site. And then once the models are created, the surgical models or the guides are delivered in the right way to the surgeon. So these platforms we see as a future where it kind of bridges the gap between the surgeon and the 3D printing, and actually really leverage the 3D printing as a standard of care for complex surgeries. Okay, so here's an example of why such platforms solutions help, right? So a surgeon can upload a scan, can talk to the patient, can show the 3D model. It's easier for the data transfer to happen. The surgeon can do the preoperative planning online or offline with the biomedical engineering team, right? And then there's also a payment gateway. So if patient needs to make the payment, the patient can make the payment. And the same way, the same platform can be used by 3D printing guys to be the kind of in the center of it, saying, okay, I'll download the file, I'll print it, and I'll ship it to you. So it kind of merges and brings everybody together under one roof. Okay, before that, before we go to the next, I'm going to have a small poll time here and have Aditya kind of run a small poll to see we have put together a question.
So should I launch the poll?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question which we have for the audience is, what material should you be using when 3D printing a surgical guide or a part that is used inside the surgery? Is it food grade material, certified biocompatible material, or any type of material? So I'll just leave this on for a few seconds so everyone can vote in. Yep. So we've got our responses. So I'm putting it out, Ketan. So if you can just throw some light on how the responses come in.
Yeah.
So we have 91% who say that certified biocompatible materials should be used. So this is good news. So Ketan, I'll
Awesome.
let you,
Awesome. Sure.
add some
Yeah.
points here.
Yeah. Okay. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Yeah, so that's great. I think, and my next section of my talk is around biocompatible materials. So it really reconfirms, what we wanted to do. So let me just go over and now switch gears and talk a little bit about biocompatibility and why that is so important. Um, so, before we go into the materials and the biocompatibility, overall, if you look at 3D printing technology, this is again singing to the choir. You guys all are expert in this. There are FDM, SLS, SLA, or DLP, or metal printing. When do you use what, right? So, for example, FDM is a great low cost, available everywhere kind of for basic visualization, right? If it's a complex surgery, you want the surgeon to take a look at it in his office and understand the anatomy. It's a great tool. It's also a great tool for patient awareness, when the surgeon wants to explain it, right? However, when you jump into a surgery, right, you have to be careful. Okay, SLS is which is what is used in those situations. SLA is used. The advantage with SLA or DLP technology, it's much faster. So for example, if you have a trauma surgery that is happening in next, say, 5 hours, right? If you have a local, let's say 3D Systems Figure 4 machine or any other DLP machine, you can print it in few hours and deliver it. Or if, for example, if a hospital has that, then you can deliver it very fast. The advantage with some of the SLA is also that you can do cutting and drilling a little bit more before. So, if you have a case where you want to do a little bit of practice beforehand, surgeon wants to do a little bit of practice beforehand, and then also use the same models in the surgery, then your SLA DLP is a better option. And then, of course, metal is all custom implants. So I'm not going to touch much on that area. Again, like I said, FDM, just be careful if you are taking these parts in the surgery, make sure that the material is USP class 6 material, certified material, which is a biomedical compatible material. I'm going to touch upon that a little bit, and so, material quality standards, if you look at it, it's 10993. I'm not going to bore with all these jargons, but in layman's term, food grade is not biocompatible material. Okay, they are two different things. Food grade means if you put a food in it, it is not going to leach into the food and your food will safe, right? However, a biocompatible is it's not going to react with the body, right? And it is not going to harm anything during the surgery. And that's where the USP class 6 certification comes in, where they actually do an animal testing, right? They do an irritation checking. They actually inject this in an animal. They implant it for a week and do all this and certify that this is biocompatible. And also, you have to make sure that the sterilization compatibility is there, whether it's an ETO or a steam, what can it do, so that if you end up doing a steam on an FDM, which is, say, USP class 6, you still run into trouble because now the final part is actually warped, right? And when you have a warped part, you take that inside the surgery, and then the fitting is an issue when you're using, say, surgical guide or something. So just those are some red flags that are important and be mindful of. So in simple terms, just ask this question, is this material USP class 6? That's it. If you are taking it inside the operation theater, stop and ask this question, is this USP class 6? The answer is yes, you can go ahead, right? If the answer is no, then don't do it. Okay, and why am I stressing on this don't do it, right? I want to give an example of other industry, and this might be a little bit of a harsh way of putting it, but I thought that it would be important for everyone to really understand the implications, because this is serious stuff. We are in medical device industry, right? So why is this important, right? India is not a regulated market just yet. It is coming. It's about 2 years from now, in 2022, India is going to be at par with global standards of medical devices. So it's only a matter of few years now. So here is an example of a regulated market. Well, this guy Charlie Chi, he actually went to a prison for selling an unapproved surgical device. It was an instrument for knee surgery. Okay, and it got rejected, and then they had put it in. So again, long story short, you have to be careful. These, when you have a medical device industry, it's a regulated market. When you have a regulated market, you need to be making sure that it doesn't impact the patient's life, because at the end of the day, these regulations are for making sure that the safety and efficacy of the patient is taken care as #1 priority for everything we do. Okay. Okay, and then the good news is India is also in line, and there's a new medical device regulation that has come up, and they already have these 6 certifying bodies. So basically, if you have a certificate from one of these, you are actually ready for a global. So that is I see it as a very positive thing, because once we are at par in terms of regulations and quality standards, it will also put companies from India in a global map. So we should look at that as a opportunity for us to kind of go global as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna kind of switch gears and talk about examples and applications where 3D printing is being used. So here's an example in the trauma area, where you have a malunion and you have this drill guide you use to recut what was unioned in a wrong way, and then reposition and put a plate, and then the patient, now before and after, you can see that the hands was much better. Another examples of pelvic fractures. These are like patients who fall from height and have multiple fracture injuries in the pelvis region. And right around this pelvis region are very critical parts of the body, and you can't. It's if you mess up some things, then it's a surgery which is considered very complex. And there are actually now a community of surgeons who are known as pelviacetabular fracture surgeons, right? Who specifically focus just on this, because the amount of care you have to make sure is very important. So in these surgeries, what you do is you do a CT scan. Of course, CT scan and 3D model is by default you have to do, and then from CT scan you align, you do a virtual reduction, you do a virtual surgical planning, and then you create these plates. And depending on what you want to do, you can you can just print these plates and bend your plate before you go into surgery, or you can take the entire model in the surgery. That really depends on the surgeon and how they want to do it. So here's an example, where this is a simple color model they wanted, and they wanted to have this to explain it to the surgeon. Okay, explain to the patient what kind of deformity they had and what kind of fracture they had, as well as also bend the plate beforehand in their office. This is I think a CJP which we printed on color. So you bend it in the office, and then you are not taking this in the surgery. You're just taking that plate that was bended in the surgery, sterilizing it, and using it in the surgery. So those are other applications where you use 3D printing. Of course, when you look at arthroplasty, these are large volume cases. But if you look at knee replacement, the femur axis guide helps reduce the number of holes you need to put in the femur, right? And it reduces the number of surgical steps. It increases the speed of the surgery. So this is where it uses. Hip replacement is another important thing, where we found that the cup positioning is very difficult, because what you see here in the image and what you see in the surgery is two different things, right? When the surgeon is looking onto the anatomy in the surgery, you really don't see much. And that's where positioning a cup becomes very important. In cup dislocation is one of the top reasons where orthopedic surgeons, especially hip surgeons who are doing surgery and placing the cup, are always worried about that. What if the patient dislocates, right? It's a worry they have, and if it dislocates, it's generally because of the cup being placed not properly. And a lot of times, when you have a deformity and an anatomy is all messed up, you can't blame them. They can't really understand where exactly to put the exact anatomy. And that's where preoperative planning, putting the cup, giving the right size of the cup also helps, because then if you give a right size, especially the newer implant designs are all press fit implants with a 3D printed osseointegration. And when you have something like that, you want that the coverage area is as high as possible, but you also don't want to over ream it, right? So those are the areas where if the surgeon had a right size of the implant, then it will help us kind of help them put the right implant for that patient. Okay, here are some examples of cases we have done. So you can see how, it's funny how, initially some of the newer surgeons, they are very shocked with the fact that, oh, the model is so accurate, it exactly matched the patient. Yeah, because it came from the CT scan. But that is the level of confidence they have today. Some of them, that they don't know if the model will be accurate. And so I think it takes time to build that confidence. But I think once the confidence is built, it becomes kind of a norm for them to kind of use it. Another example is reverse shoulder arthroplasty, for shoulder replacements, where positioning the spin becomes very critical. There is really, it's like finding a exact center of a circle, and it's not that easy virtual during the surgery. So using such guides kind of help position and drill exactly where they need to, so that the final implant has a proper anchoring on the chunky part of the bone. And clearly there is a literature showing that if you use something like this, then you have a less risk of revision. So in other words, you are able to put the implant at a more accurate location. Here's an example of a SLA model being compared along with the actual. This is an actual case we did. Okay, and then of course 3D printing, metal 3D printing. I think there's enough information out. A lot of people already know about it, so I'm not going to talk much about that. But it is the gold standard in terms of today. If you look, titanium osseointegrated implants are considered as a gold standard, because look at the picture on the left hand side here, right? This is 4 week and then 12 weeks. So basically in 3 months the bone has integrated all the way inside and kind of became part of it. So if you think about it, right, now this implant is actually part of that individual, right? A part of the bone. You just cannot remove it anymore, right? So it becomes part of the patient, which is a great news. But also there are disadvantages. If you have to do a revision, it becomes even more challenging. But again, this kind of gives a flavor of the 3D printing for metal. With that, I want to conclude that 3D printing technology is definitely a de facto standard, more for complex surgeries, and especially options for anatomical models, surgical guides, and implants when the anatomy is so different is where the 3D printing will lead the way. With that, I want to thank you, and yeah, feel free to reach out to me with if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Ketan. I think that gives us great insight into the world of orthopedics and how a 3D printing company should look at orthopedics as a field as well. Because as you said, it's always there's always going to be difference of opinion when there is a clinician and an engineer. So because they're molded that way, right? So it's not they're not doing it purposely, but that's how that they're molded in. So I think that's great, and we've received a couple of questions, but we'll take them at the end of the panel. So I think they're meant for you, but we'll take it at the end as well. So thanks again, Ketan. And moving on, I'd like to introduce Firoza Kotari from Anatomize. Anatomize has been one of the pioneers, I can say, in the focused medical application space. And Firoza, I think, has been kind of a bright star of this industry in India. And it's great to have her on today and share her insights on a particular space of 3D printing, which is increasing in demand, I think. So I'll without much sharing much, I'll introduce her. So Firoza, if you can take over and start your session on the point.
Yes. Thanks, Aditya, for that introduction. And I'd like to thank Dilip and Abhishek as well for organizing this. I'd just like to start by saying it's been a great evolution. I remember 5 years ago when we used to speak about what is 3D printing, and people didn't generally know that. And now after 5 years, we are talking about core applications and how it can actually benefit. So I think this is a great evolution, and thanks Ayushi and Ketan for making my work really, really easy today by explaining all of those. So I'll just quickly share my slides, and I'll focus majorly on point of care today. So I hope you guys can see my screen.
Yes, Firoza.
Okay, perfect. So to all the guys listening out there, thank you so much for joining in. And before we begin, I'd like to request you to visualize the scenario. You can even choose to like close your eyes if you'd like for this particular session. But the point that I want you guys to visualize is that imagine that you guys are going to cook your favorite dish to eat tonight. Okay, you have brought all the fresh ingredients and you're really excited to start cooking. But in this hypothetical situation, imagine that your, say, box of salt is in your bedroom, your cooking oil is in the bathroom, your pan is in the living room, and your butter is in the attic. And now you start cooking. You remember one by one where all of these necessities are, but can you imagine how many times you'll have to move out of your kitchen to bring all of these essentials? It's quite inconvenient, right? And imagine the time that you'd waste. But in reality, you have a cabinet right above your stove, which contains the salt and the cooking oil. You have the drawers below which have the pan, and you have a fridge right next to it with the butter. All is consolidated within the kitchen to make your life and your cooking activity easy, more efficient, and quick. And this is exactly what a point of care 3D printing lab is all about. So it's basically having all the simple ingredients that make for a good diagnostic and surgical tool right inside the hospital for easy and instant access. So you have the software for designing, you have a clinically seasoned designer who understands surgical language, and an operator, of course, with the 3D printer of the choice based on the different applications that the institute is catering to. So with that, just to give you guys a quick introduction, Anatomize 3D is an innovation hub, and we've been in the healthcare and surgical space for about 5 years now. We were the first ones in India to have done soft tissue modeling and also point of care establishments here in India. And we cater to different types of products such as anatomical models, surgical cutting and drilling guides, implant molds, implants, cranial helmets, etc. But let me run you through the usual process which takes place when we are outside of a point of care lab. So it's typically something like this. The scan is taken at the lab. It is, or a diagnostic center. It is sent to us. We study the data set. We understand the region of interest and what the final application is going to be. And accordingly, we plan the entire process to design the final products. Then we 3D print it in an appropriate technology, and we finally provide it to the surgeon. A lot of these things Ketan and Ayushi has already touched upon, so I hope this gets easier to understand, but I will be speaking about it a little later as well. Now, as simple as all of this sounds, this involves a lot of back and forth between the design team and the surgeon. So let's face it, the surgeons are highly loaded with work of their own. So even though we are all well experienced and can do most of the job ourselves, we still require a surgeon to finalize it. This is literally a 2-second job, but can take an entire day based on the doctor's availability. Sometimes even the next day. So this affects the entire delivery cycle time and makes rapid prototyping not so rapid anymore. So a point of care lab can help reduce this time efficiently by almost 40 to 80%. Now, there are quite a few challenges. First one is the scan quality. In order to get a good and accurate 3D model, we require the scan to be of a certain optimum quality, else we just end up doing more harm to the patient than good, and I'm sure none of us really want this. It might even make the clinician lose faith from the technology altogether. So it's important that we receive standardized data in the form of a standardized scanning protocol. This will ensure seamless integration of the technology as a diagnostic tool. So doctors are also very innovative in nature, and it's really exciting to see that every doctor has some or the other pet project that they would really like to make a difference with. They know what they want as they are the end users, and with this POC they get a platform in-house to tinker with. It's like having an office at home, say for a working mother, with everything around, the table, the laptop, the Wi-Fi, printer, etc., etc. Just imagine everything. This leads to a surge of creativity and a definite growth of the community. So some of you might even question now, is reduction in time and improvement in processes really that crucial? The answer is very simple, it's yes. The WHO norm suggests that there should be at least one practicing doctor in a population of 1,000 people, whereas in India, the ratio is 1 in 1,600. So we only have 0.8 million doctors in a population of over 1.3 billion people. and 80% of them are in urban areas. And this is just India. Even the most developed nations have seen the healthcare system break down in our current pandemic situation. But even in this situation, we cannot stop providing care to those in need. We can help by making surgeries easier, faster, and more precise, allowing the medical teams to cater to more patients more effectively and locally. So let's go ahead and define our end users. It all starts with radiology because 3D printing is nothing but an extension of the same to actually begin with. It's an amazing diagnostic tool to report cases better. Then come the medical practitioners who use the anatomical models, cutting and drilling guides, implants, etc. to provide a personalized approach to their patient surgery, and it also helps in patient communication. They can then go ahead and teach their trainees or fellows who are learning a particular specialization. These doctors can even conduct workshops to teach other doctors from around the world, and they can practice the technique while the inventor is actually demonstrating it. And of course, in education, there is a desperate need to evolve and improve simulators in order to reduce the dependency on cadavers. However, at the end of the day, the person who benefits the most from all of the above mentioned practices is none other than the patient. And this is exactly where a point of care lab comes into the picture, right between radiology and other end users. We've done several such labs here in India with some of the biggest chains in the country, but today it gives me immense pleasure to announce that we have also collaborated with Apollo Hospitals in Hyderabad, and we are really, really excited for our journey over there. So what is it that you would do at this point of care lab? So the first thing that you would look at is a anatomical model. I'll just quickly run this video. So it's basically working on the CT and MRI scans, bringing that to the software, converting that data into a 3D model, and then printing it out and providing it to the surgeon. This particular patient had a hole in the heart, and the parents had gone across the country to find surgeons who could help operate on this patient, but no one thought that the patient would survive a surgery. The last set of doctors that these guys went to, they were really adamant, and they had read up about 3D printing somewhere across in USA or something like that. And these guys came back to us and they were like, they really want to take up this surgery. So we started doing the planning, we started making the 3D models, and we gave it to them in hand, and they realized that not only is a surgery possible, but honestly the best possible outcome for that patient is possible. So these anatomical models, if at point of care, can help in the decision making and can help in choosing whether or not to opt for a surgery, which eventually will highly affect the patient's future. So that is one. Second one, and of course, this is not just heart, but you can do the specializations. You can provide these solutions across all of these specializations if you are in-house at the point of care lab. And as I mentioned about the innovation part, people are free to explore in whatever fields they would want to do that. The next one is the osteotomy guides. This patient had a huge tumor in the pelvis. And in such cases, it's really important to get the cut right. If you cut off more bone or if you cut off less bone, both of them are highly dangerous situations in a way. So this surgical planning is done on the computer, and we were able to print out the jig and give it to the surgeon. A procedure which would have ideally taken them 2 to 3 hours in locating the exact cut sections to resect at, they were able to do it in literally 10 minutes. So it not only reduced the time in the OT, but it also reduced the patient blood loss and eventual patient trauma that it would have caused. So the next one is custom implants. Don't worry, this is not all of one patient. I've just put across different implants over here to show you. And there is in no way I am saying that these custom implants should be printed inside a POC lab. We are not there yet. But the planning of this entire designing resection plane, which we spoke about earlier, and creation of the implant can be done at the point of care lab, right where the surgeon is. They can test it out in plastic, they can try it out, whether it works, it doesn't work. And then they can go ahead, once everything is finalized, they can go ahead with printing it in metal at a certified facility. So Yeah, the next one is just an introduction. It's a cranial helmet. This is something that is used for children who have a deformed skull shape, but this project is really close to my heart, so I am showing it to you all. May or may not be a point of care lab product, but it's something where the patient can come in, you scan the surface of the head, and in terms of correcting the deformation, you create a helmet which will allow that when the child grows, it corrects the skull shape, so eventually it does not affect the brain brain in any way during the growth and development phase. Simulation and training models, as I mentioned, they can be conducting workshops. You could be conducting training for your trainees or your fellows who are coming to learn with you. And all of these are just examples of some of the training models that we've made in number of batches. As I said, reduces the dependency on cadavers and allows, if say there are 10 people or 40 people in that particular workshop who are learning, they don't need to surround one cadaver like in Munna Bhai, you all would have seen the movie, you all would have seen that 30 people are surrounding one cadaver. No one's actually getting the clear understanding of what they need to see. Here, everyone can have their own model and they can practice on that. So it gives for a better learning experience. So even in terms of the coronavirus, we saw that a lot of doctors wanted to invent certain things on their own at their own point of care labs. So you could take face shields, you could take the ventilator splitters, you could take these adjuster straps. Of course, a lot of this does require certifications and you need to go back end and you need to get those things certified, but it's a great tool for surgeons who want to innovate, for clinicians who want to innovate and come up with their own techniques or their own products per se. So let's see how we set one up. What do you do at a point of care lab? The first and the foremost thing that we need to do is standardize imaging for all the different types of cases that can come along. So this will help avoiding rescanning of the patient, which in turn means less radiation for them and reduced inconvenience for the technicians. The next thing is that you place a clinically seasoned designer. This is of utmost importance, someone who understands the medical language and routine surgical practices. This will ensure that there is accurate segmentation of the anatomy and of the designing tools also which are developed. So this particular designer or a separate operator should be adept with fixing of the files in-house itself to make sure that you can make it 3D printable depending on the different printers that are set up at that lab. And the materials is what this person needs to understand, because as Ketan also mentioned, these materials are of utmost importance when you're doing something in the OT. So this ensures that there are no discrepancies in the model and the final application that you're doing. So it's important to choose the right kind of 3D printing and post-processing tools so that you get the maximum utilization for different applications that the hospital caters to. A lot of printers have their own specific applications, but of course, you're not going to put in all the printers at one hospital. So pick and choose based on what the specializations are catered to majorly, and then go ahead for a printer. All of this in one place enables people to make quick decisions and provides faster turnaround times. And this provides us with a happy surgeon. So with all of this, there will still be, those challenges that we were talking about earlier, we can slowly aim to overcome them. And we might see that this might even become a standard of care a few years down the line. You will still come across a lot of reservations though. And let's discuss how we can overcome those reservations. You might hear people say that 3D printing is required for complex cases only. So this was true until now, but with having set up those labs, we really saw surgeons asking for more prints. It's making communication easier with the patient and also between the doctors. Next, you might hear it's expensive. Well, on an average, the cost of the OT alone is somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 rupees a minute somewhere in India. So imagine how much time, if we are able to save the example I gave you of 3 hours to 10 minutes, imagine how much time we were able to save over there, eventually how much cost we were able to save over there. And for the patient, it is a better recovery. The hospital can cater to more and more patients in the same duration. If you ask me, it's honestly a win-win at both ends. Next thing you might hear is that I don't have enough cases. Agreed. But one probably doesn't have a bottle of wine every day either, right? Still, it's handy to have a bottle opener at home. You never know. Similarly, you will never know when you have these emergency cases and when you might need to use it. The next thing is we don't know how to use this. That's actually no worry at all. That's where we place our seasoned designers and engineers and operators to fluently handle their processes for them, or at least we can train them to get the basic anatomical conversions done independently, and then it could come back to us for the more complex cases. The next thing you might hear is we don't know which printers to choose. We are here to guide people through this, understand their core applications and suggest printers accordingly. For any other application, there are service providers outside. We are here. All of us can always be there and back end to support them. So all of these reservations can be easily overcome if there's a meeting of minds and synergies between multiple stakeholders, such as medical professionals, hospital managements, OEMs, service providers, software developers, etc., etc. Even though the saying goes that too many cooks spoil the broth, I know, sorry, I'm talking about a lot of food today, but please bear with me. So even though we say that too many cooks spoil the broth, I believe that this is a group of specialists. Someone is a master of Italian cuisine, someone of Persian food, etc., etc. And if we want to be a multi-cuisine restaurant, we need all of these cooks to come together and add in their own recipes to give the best variety and experience to its customers. With that, I would like to end my presentation and open to any questions. Thank you so much for listening. And I guess Aditya will have a poll to share at the end of this talk.
Yes, Firoza. I think good that we didn't continue the session up to lunchtime, because I think you took talking about a lot of food. I think everyone's slowly getting hungry after.
Yeah, I think it's building up the appetite for people. So
everybody's been at home, eating home cooked foods. I think you're tempting people to order in. So on that note, I just have a poll for, based on what Firoza spoke. I just want to see how the audience would react to this. So we have a poll here where, how convinced are you to allow use of these advanced diagnostic and surgical tools, and why? So this is a poll we would like to ask our audience here. We have a mix here. So we have clinicians, we have service bureaus, we have the entire stakeholders in a way here. So for example, if you were the end consumer undergoing treatment, how convinced are you to allow for use of these advanced diagnostics and surgical tools, and why? So I'll just leave it on for a few seconds so we get responses from everyone out here, so we get a fair feel of how the industry is seeing this. Yeah, so I'm closing the poll now. So let's see what everyone's thinking. So 66% of you feel that yes, it will make the surgical journey less traumatic. I think that's good news for the 3D printing industry and all of you, who've been working really hard to put it on the map. So I think, what do you think, Firoza?
Oh, that is great news. I feel more relieved that people also believe that way after these presentations. Yeah. So that's good to know.
So a good point to see is that only 5% felt that no, it might be unaffordable. So I think that points towards perhaps the costs or the perception of it coming down. So I think that's a good sign as well. So
absolutely,
with this,
that's a good feedback.
I'd like to invite all our panelists to be online so we can quickly, take questions which we are getting from the audience. So if any of the audience have any of the questions, you can just share them with your name and also with whom you are asking this to. So I'll just start with the first questions I've got. Aishi, are you there, right?
Yes, I'm there. I'm just switching on.
Okay. So we have a question from Vivekanand Shanbag. I think this is directed to Ketan. So the question is, what other properties other than accuracy and biocompatibility are really expected from the surgical guide?
Biocompatibility and accuracy is basic, but I would say that the number one is working with the surgeon and understanding exactly what the surgical plan is going to be. And clinical aspect is what I would say is number one above even biocompatibility and accuracy.
To Ketan, this is basically what are the materials and 3D printers being used for surgical guides. So maybe after Ketan, maybe Ayushi or Firoza, you can also add in. So Ketan, what do you feel about this?
Yeah. If you look at materials, again, I kind of covered it. It's mostly, medical grade. Nylon is probably the most common, with SLS being, I would say, in the top. And then now slowly the SLA and DLP technology, which is becoming more easier for access in terms of the size of the printers as well as the biocompatible material that is available, are the two top contenders in general, I would.
Okay.
But on the other side, I must say that there are companies who have also started metal 3D printing a surgical guide, all the way. They would put a titanium drill guide for that surgery, but that is sort of an extreme part.
And your comments, Firoza or Ayushi, anyone would like to?
Yeah, sure. Shall I take it up? So
Yeah,
I think Ketan had put it beautifully in that chart, wherein he mentioned that FDM provides lesser accuracy, but it's okay to test it out on a model of sorts, but not on the patient. When you're going onto the patient, I would never suggest FDM materials, because one, the strength is also an issue. Plus the biocompatibility, no matter how much you sterilize, we are still not sure of the effects. So it's always better to either go with an SLS nylon material, or you could use the desktop SLA DLP printers, which have the, say, dental materials or surgical guide materials. So those would definitely preferable. Metal, yes, I agree, is too extreme. I don't think that is something that will work in at least India, at least. But these two, I agree with Ketan and the chart that he had put up over there.
Ayushi, anything to add or?
I think both of them gave very good pointers, especially the slide which was given by Ketan was self-explanatory. And the metal printer part is actually quite interesting for the big MNCs. That's what we are seeing, standard implants, and they want to go into standard implant production using 3D, and they want to go for metal printers, and they want to go into 3D PSI. So they are the ones who are entering into the segment. So I think that's quite justified, because they have good big revenue, they have heavy pockets. So yeah, I mean, it's going in a positive trend. And when we talk about FDM printers not being used in the body, so I think that awareness is coming up within the people, the population, and service providers. They are also actively looking at different technologies which are much more biocompatible to the body. So yeah.
Okay. So moving on, I think that sums up a good kind of aspect on this topic. So moving on, Firoza, there's a question for you. This is from Jitendra Singh on what could be the regulatory framework to operate point of care in hospital for surgical devices?
Right. So what I had mentioned in that framework as well, it's very important that different aspects of a point of care lab are taken into consideration. It's not just about the designing and the 3D printing, it's also about the input of the design. So the radiology department, which is providing us with the CT and MRI scans, have to have standardized protocols. If in case the scan is not received with the standardized protocols, there should be an immediate rejection of those scans. This is one way we can ensure at the beginning itself that what you're going to do going forward is standardized. Secondly, the designer or the designing softwares that you're utilizing should have proven that it is converting the data correctly. So Materialize, we have a very long-term affiliation with them, and that's what we use, wherein we know for a fact that what we are designing, that is accurate. Next, you go in for a printer. The printer you have to always put in test bills along with your material, so that you ensure that what you are getting out is matching with what you have actually designed. Because in such short periods of time, there is no way you're going to go back and reverse engineer the whole thing, because you have to provide these parts in about 24 hours timeline or less. So you get a confirmation over there. All of these things have to be documented from the first point to the last point, all the way until the feedback of the surgeon. So as long as we keep all of these processes in check, documented with the surgeon's approvals, patient's approval, signatures, everything, I think we should be good to go as a standardized format.
Thanks, Firoza. I have a question from Dr. Abhishek Desai, who's asking, how is the adoption of 3D printing applications for orthotic external splints and prosthetic designing in India? I'd like to open this to all panelists, but maybe Ayushi, if you want to answer first, and then maybe we can go to Firoza and Ketan.
So Aditya, we have a lot of customers of our own, especially incubation centers who are working on prosthetics, IIT Bombay being one of them, and they are doing tremendous work. So they are, tying up with a lot of NGOs, they're doing a lot of R&D. So honestly, it's not that rampant, but definitely application is there. It's good enough to explore. If you have the means, you have the resources, we can definitely have a good synergy, in partnering with the organizations to explore this. But yes, there are incubation centers and a lot of institutes like IITs and NITs are working on that. So application is definitely there.
Anything, Ketan or Firoza, you would like to add to that?
Yeah, we don't have any experience, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, similarly for me, we are more in the surgical space apart from the cranial orthotics that I was speaking about. But the reason why we chose to do that is because there's actually no solution out there which 3D printing will actually require to solve. That's where we are coming in. So my experience with other casts and splints and prosthetics is very, very minimal, maybe 4 years ago or something like that. So I might not be the right person to comment. But I do know a lot of people who are working on developing newer designs to bring better solutions out in the market. So as Ayushi said, there's definitely an application. I'm just not the right person to speak about that.
Okay.
And Aditya, just to add a point here, we have a lot of, we have, I think, 2-3 service providers who are into hand splints. So they are replacing the POP ones and they are going into 3D printed hand splint. I think it's OrthoHeal, if I'm not sure, the company name, and they are doing a lot of good work. So that, ideas and innovations are coming up. It's just about how, widespread they are in the country.
Yes. I'd have another question directed to Firoza. Is question from Gagandeep. Who is the ideal user of software in hospital setup in your opinion?
Okay, this can be answered in 2 ways, and it will be evolutionary over a period of time. At the initial stages of point of care labs, it will always be a designer. It's ideally should always be an engineer or a designer who understands this, because even though yes, there has been tremendous growth in the industry, there are still certain things which require attention and coordination between your designing and your 3D printing. So having a knowledge of both of these together till the point that 3D printers become plug and play and as simple as one would want it to be, it's always ideal that an engineer is someone who is handling the processes both on the surgical and the printing side. Over a period of time, however, I do feel that radiologists will become a part of this software training, wherein you will see that in the radiology course, in the graduation itself, they might learn these softwares, who knows, and they will be the ones who will be leading the designing aspect of these labs. So I guess it's going to be evolutionary, starting off with engineers, moving on to radiologists. That's my belief.
I think that's a good point. That it's always going to be a dynamic situation as and when 3D printing becomes more and more familiar. I think that is when we'll slowly move to the next phase. There's another question for Ketan. Basically, there's a question from Sudhir Sethi. So what he says is, do you have a collection centers across India to collect the data?
Yeah, so we realized that this was a gap. So what we did was we created on a MySegmenter platform. It's the collection center is right on your computer or everybody's computer. So you basically, if you have a CD, you zip the file and upload it on mysegmenter.com and explain what exactly you need. And typically, it's not just as simple as it sounds, right? Once we get the data, a lot of times we have to make sure that the data is exactly what we need. Like even Firoza mentioned, you have to make sure that the scans are in 1 millimeter slices to make sure that you have high resolution. And then once we have a better understanding, then the 3D planning activities can immediately start. So the collection centers are sort of everywhere. Every computer is is kind of a collection center.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Ketan. I have another question from Daniel Arokyam, who's asking it for the entire panel. Is patient-specific implants have very intricate features? Is there any virtual validation of patient-specific implants done for avoiding warpage or distortion? I think maybe Ayushi can start or lead on this one, and then we can go to the other panelists.
No, the first thing which I would like to start here is when what kind of a software are you using? So is it FDA approved, CE marked? So that validates the quality of the software in which you're trying to create the patient specific implant, because we see that a lot of users might use openwares or freewares because they just want to test it out initially. So that would be a number one major turnoff for validation of a of the patient specific implant. Coming on to in our software, it's FDA approved, it's CE marked, and we have got a lot of modules. Especially when you're trying to create an implant, you can do a lot of accuracy measurements. You can even have a pre or post-op analysis. So you can have a scan. You can impose those 2D pictures on the 3D images just to see whether the the specific implant is aligning with that. So there are a lot of measures, and typically all the softwares right now, which are good quality softwares, they have those features. So once you get into the habit, I think training of the person who's the end user, who's actually working on the software also matters. How well is he in reading those scans? How well is he in creating the implants? So once you create that, it's a small bit of a learning curve. But with the software and the engineer, I think the combination of both, and yes, a good software, you would definitely get a good result, which is accurate.
Anything you want to add, Ketan or Firoza?
No, she covered it up from my side at least.
Yeah. Our experience has been that it's really the surgeon's input and surgeon's experience that count above everything, because typically when are you using custom implants, right? If the standard was available, you are not going to use it, right? Typically, because standards you can trust, it's been tested, validated, and has been clinically proven, right? It's only when you have a situation where the anatomy is so messed up for the patient that you have to use custom implants. And when we create a custom implant, the surgeon's input becomes the most important part, where we also look at the existing similar designs in the industry where the standard implants is used. So for example, just take an example of, say, a triflange you are designing for custom, say, hip, right? Then you would look at what are some of the revision portfolio cages that are available in the industry. What is the thickness they use? Oh, they use 6 mm, or they use 8 mm. You make sure that your thicknesses are in that range to make sure that the failures are not happening. And this is where, again, a lot of input is coming from surgeon itself. It's not just that we as an engineer, because honestly, a lot of times we have to really rely on their experience. We may not have that particular area's expertise, but we also on the other side have to accept the fact that the failure risk is high. Okay, because in these situations, you're already working on a case where the existing implant is not working, or whatever standard is not available or not going to work for that patient. And it's a unique situation. And when you have a unique situation, the failure rates are high and there is a higher risk. However, there are engineering tools like Ayushi mentioned, right? You can use a finite element analysis and do like a quick load testing to make sure that you do like a 5x of the actual load of the patient, right? If the patient is say 80 kg, you do multiply by 5, you do put 450 kg load and do an impact test virtually, and then see, hey, is this good enough? It's not breaking. And those are the basic tests you can do, and that's pretty much it. But a lot of it, again, like I said, it's surgeon's approval and surgeon's input that at the end is final.
Yeah.
And just would like to add one more point, Aditya, here, that so design validation can definitely be done by the surgeons as well as the the software. We can take an input from the surgeon, but then the printer also matters here, because the quality of the printer, whether it's suitable for that kind of an implant. So that constraint also should be there, and we should also take in mind that what quality of printer are we using. So that would also define the end product which we feel in the hand.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point to add. Moving on, we have a few more questions. I'm just taking one more, maybe a couple of more. We have a question on materials specifically, where Mohammad Hashim is asking, what do you think about SSS 316L filament from BASF or PEEK material from Evonik as using for printing out surgical guides. So any takers for this question on the material side of it?
I can take it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start. So if it is for surgical guides, again, like I had mentioned in my presentation, as long as it's USP class 6 material, you get a certificate, you're good to go. You can use anything, as long as that certification is there. But it sounds like if it's 316L and PEEK, we might be also talking about this as an implant, right? So as an implantable material. Now, when you have an implantable material, it is not only the material that needs to be certified. Now your process also needs to be certified in a very rigorous way, right? So there are standards that needs to be followed for manufacturing of those final parts, and you have to do an implantable material testing where it goes into an animal, you do the testing, and that's where you get the certification saying yes, it's not only the material but it's also the process that is certified. Your manufacturing needs to be in a clean room environment. So there are a lot of things that come in when it comes to an implant material, but for the surgical guide, I think USP class 6 is a good start.
You want to add anything, Firoza, or?
Yeah, so yeah, when we are talking about SS and PEEK, as Ketan mentioned, we would be looking at, as an industry, it is generally looked upon more as an implant material than as a jig material for multiple reasons, but two major things being you don't really require those kind of materials for a jig, and secondly, the costs are something that might inhibit the usage of those materials here. So the materials that we discussed earlier in terms of nylon, in terms of the dental materials, have proven all these years to give a very, very good, feedback onto the patient over there. Like we've seen good results with those materials. So unless in a similar material in those polymers, we see a different material, we necessarily don't need to shift to PEEK or SS for something like that.
And also talking about the implants, Aditya, I mean, PEEK is a very good, it's a high grade material, especially used for implants. And, typically when you'll be producing it out, manufacturing the whole thing and 3D printing it out, and then you want to go for the sterilization purpose as well. So let's say if there is a big, medical device company, a big orthopedic company who has deep pockets and who can invest and they can afford that high patient safety and quality, they can definitely invest in PEEK. But then, as what Firoza and Ketan said, that if it's a service bureau and you want to start slow, so you can invest at the lower end and then progress higher.
So that's an interesting question. I think this could turn out to be a quite interesting application from Sudhir Shetty. This question is to all panelists, and the question is: can we create a model for training surgeons wherein we have various different procedures, like 4-part humeral fracture, for as just an example? So this is basically to avoid cadavers. So anyone can start, but I think everyone will have a viewpoint on this. So
absolutely, I can start on that aspect. Yeah. So that is something that is really, really coming up in the industry. In fact, we are also doing workshops in such cases. From the last 5 years, whatever cases we've accumulated, we've segmented out 143 such different complex cases as mentioned over there. It could be fractures, it could be tumors, it could be complex congenital heart diseases or bone disorders, whatever, and segmented them into specializations which could be utilized by surgeons to practice their surgeries on. And this could be made in as realistic a scenario as possible. So it is definitely gaining momentum in the surgical industry. If you visit a lot of these exhibitions or these conferences on specializations in medical, there will always generally be a segment where there is a hands-on training on such models. So it's definitely gaining momentum, and we are only hoping that it improves and becomes more realistic in the future with different processes.
Yeah, thanks, Firoza. I think Ayushi, you had a specific segment on this, so would be interesting to know your views.
So it is quite surprising that in India the adoption is almost zero. Being 3D printed model being used as an analytical model. However, on the Western side, majority of our service providers who use our software, so I'm talking about from the software perspective, almost all of them have a very good relation with all the medical institutes and colleges. And one of our biggest service provider in Australia, they actually have tie-ups with all the universities, and they provide even neuro models. It's that high end, and you need that much of finesse. And right now you have so many materials from all the printer companies that you can create that kind of flexibility or that kind of hardness. And that would be the way to go, I mean, in medical fraternity right now, because number one, COVID. So you have COVID right now, so you don't know whether the cadaver has COVID or not, right? And you won't be able to risk out lives. So I think this is a very good mode to go in, be it anatomical models just for patient consultation, or for just showing them different kind of anatomies, or even creating cadavers from 3D printing. And not just the human cadaver, but every kind of anatomy you can print in, and the surgeons can have that real feel, a proper body like flesh like feeling. I have seen couple of models from our service providers, and when you feel it, like spinal models, you actually can see that, okay, once you're taking a biopsy, how would it feel like? So you can just put a vial inside and you can take it out. And a few of my colleagues who are in the 3D printing industry, like Anatomize and Ketan, they are actually working on that. But that's definitely a very good, interesting area to explore. And I'm just hoping that India takes a front lead in that, because we have so many medical colleges. And number one, it's feasible. So it's very feasible. It's very much easy. We just need to spread awareness to the medical colleges.
Just a minute. I'm just seeing if I've not missed any questions.
Yeah. So maybe I can add in the meantime.
Sure.
So yeah, even though it's feasible, like my perspective is that in India, it's probably the affordability that comes in, right? So I mean, you look at statuses, they have this objet printer, I think it's 750 or something. You can print entire anatomy with a full spectrum of different densities. So you can literally, like Ayushi said, you can literally print a cadaver. But the challenge is those printers, the cost of the material, and it's really prohibitive in terms of making a cadaver model, because at the end of the day, right, the purpose is to have a fine motor skill of these surgeons to be improved. Like, so they have to actually make the cut, they have to find, there is a muscle attachment, and the human anatomy is so complex. So creating that would require, the cost will be so high that I see that that's probably the main reason why it is still not ready yet. However, on the other side, in terms of explaining the anatomy, in terms of having different, like Firoza said, different shapes and sizes, or specific unique anatomies where they can use this, is absolutely something that a lot of medical colleges should, I think, start leveraging.
And just to add one point, Aditya, I mean, a very important point is the lead time. So in my previous organization, we used to do a lot of cadaver workshops, and we have to book it like 2 months, 3 months in advance, because they need to find cadavers, right? With 3D printing, there you have an advantage over that, the lead time. So you want it, let's say within a week, you can actually get it. So you can conduct those events, you can conduct those cadaver workshop, training workshop at whenever you want to. So you don't need to wait. So I would say lead time somehow, if not overall aligning with the cost, but then it compensates the cost as well, because time is money right now in this time, and keeping in environmental conditions, what is happening around us. So I think cadaver, going for 3D printing is a very good idea.
Thanks. I think that's a well-rounded response to that question. I think, and this could really be a real good business case going ahead as well, which all of you have shared. We're taking one last question now, and obviously there are more questions which have come in, but which we'll share with the speakers, and then they can be taken offline. So there's one more question from Daniel Arokyam, and I think this answers Gagandeep's question as well. It's the same question as such. So with respect to data privacy laws, how the data security and compliance is addressed in the entire chain of the patient-specific implant. So right from when it's from the data to whatever chain it goes in, how is this enforced, or how is this ensured that there is no data breach on data privacy?
A lot of this, when we receive the data itself from these labs, say for example the point of care labs, We are still in a process wherein this is an evolution, where this entire process of data privacy is an evolution. But these softwares and all that they have on their consoles and what we have, there are options to anonymize the data.
Yeah.
So what you do is you take away all the names, you take away the gender, you take away any relevant information that might reveal the identity of the patient, and what you only have is the anatomy with you. So that is the first step where it begins. Second, when it comes down to a service bureau, there are always internal codings that are provided to these. So in case if there is any reference in the future for those cases, we are always using these code names. Going forward in the printing as well, the same procedure is taken care of on the prints also. You don't have any patient name, you have these code names that have been internally generated in your processes. And similarly going forward to the surgeon. So in this way, this is the end-to-end process that at least I'm sure the service bureaus are following. Maybe Ayushi can help in understanding more on the software side, and Ketan could put in his feedback on the service bureau aspect as well. But this is how we are ensuring data privacy, at least from what I know in the industry for this case.
So yeah, as what Firoza correctly mentioned, so in software you have that option to anonymize the the basic vitals of the patient name and age and all the information which is typically in the DICOM file. So you can anonymize that. So that is what we do from our end. We also try to have an NOC kind of a thing. So I would not say a non-objection certificate, but we try and explain it to the end patient, because we also offer services to the patients as well and to the doctors. So it's like an informed consent. So we try and explain the whole thing, that if we would be using it, we might be using it for X purposes, and otherwise no. So it can go both the ways, but it's always informed.
Yeah, and so I agree. I think it's like Ayushi mentioned. You start with the patient consent as a starting point. That whatever data you received, you have an agreement from the patient or approval from the patient to receive it. But the patient consent is really, it's very country specific, right? If you look at, for example, in India, the laws are there. It's not that they're not there, but the laws are a little bit lenient in terms of for example, you cannot share a patient's face without the patient's consent. But if you are sharing a small picture of a surgery, right, and with the surgeon's approval, that's okay. So these are some of the laws that are a little bit lenient. However, on the other side, if you look at the extreme sides, Germany, for example, they won't even allow a patient's DICOM file to be transported outside the country. Okay, so you basically would have to install Mimics in Germany and do the segmentation there, for example. Right? So it varies from country to country. But we for example, we have a system in place where we don't use patient name. We always use an order ID, which is a sort of a unique order ID, which makes sure that all our communications doesn't have patient information in it. However, the data does have patient information that we receive. So we can't say that we don't have the information. So that's where we kind of protect by making sure that we have the consent of the patient.
Thank you, Ketan. And with this, I think we're concluding the panel for today. And I think the discussions can continue offline as well. And this is just a start for us. And as I said, it's going to be a series of medical 3D printing sessions. So we invite, we thank everyone for joining today. We thank the speakers today for sharing, interesting insights, and they've kept it quite innovative. So that's been great. And also we thank all our audience to have these questions come up to us, and please do join us for our future sessions. So with this, we'll end the session for today. So thanks a lot again, Firoza, Ketan, and Ayushi, and thanks a lot for everyone joining.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Ketan. Bye, Ayushi.
Bye-bye.